anti-Semitism and promoting tolerance. As a young woman, my mother lost her entire family during the Shoah, so I am all too familiar with the devastating impacts of hatred and anti-Semitism. Yet, I am also familiar with the other side of humanity, because my mother was saved by one of the most special righteous among the nations, and not just because he saved my mother. His name was Antosh Suchinski, a loner and an outcast who lived in a small house in the town of Zborov, then Poland, now Ukraine, only a few hundred miles from where we are now. Refusing to be indifferent to the plight of his fellow human beings and risking his own life, he took into his very modest home a young woman who was all alone in the world, my mother, Eva Alperi. Unlike so many others, day after day, moment by moment, he risked his life to save her and the lives of 5 other Jews he was also hiding. Indeed, it was precisely my mother's story, her experience of both extreme cruelty and extraordinary kindness during the Shoah, that inspired me to become one of the co-founders of the March of the Living and attend the first march here in Poland in 1988, 34 years ago, and every year since. I would like to take this opportunity to remember the late Mr. Abraham Hirzon, who passed away a little over a month ago, who first had the vision of the March of the Living so many years ago and acknowledged his relentless efforts in ensuring that this vision become a reality. Baruch Zichro Yeh. The Shoah illustrates both the best and the worst of humanity, both darkness and light. On the March of the Living, we attempt to teach our students both lessons. On the one hand, humanity's almost infinite capacity for evil. On the other hand, we also explain to the students that our fellow human beings have the capacity for exceptional heroism and courage during the darkest of times. This is why the symposium is so important. We must continue to search for ways to uncover and combat the roots of racism and anti-Semitism. Yet, we must also educate society about the role they can play as upstanders, as models of justice and heroism, and as champions of tolerance and coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baruch. I would now like to invite to the stage the Chief Chazan, the Chief Cantor of the Israel Defense Force, Mr. Shai Abramson, to sing for us Kinor Atzur.
Violin of sorrow, I hear you crying. The tune is mournful, the moon is dying. The klezmer's music is heard no more. Was turned to ash by flames of war. In death's dark chamber, no music echoed, the klezmer's light has dimmed forever. The strings were broken one fearful day. The children's hair has turned to gray. So play me now another tune, my mournful violin. Bring back those memories to me, and let them let me. So call it play. Let your music forever swell. You are the witness who's left to tell. We shall remember those million eyes out of the darkness. New hope will rise. So let me out another tune. My wonderful violin, bring back those memories to me, and let them burn within. So come and play me one by one your old age sweet refrain, and let my heart renew itself and bring me hope again.
Thank you very much. We're very privileged to have with us this evening two members of the Israeli Knesset, the State of Israel's Parliament, Mufid Mar'i and Yasmin Friedman, with us. I would like to invite Member of Knesset Friedman to share with us a few words. Bevakasha.
Member of the Knesset, Mufid Mar'i, Chairman of the Jewish Agency Board of the Governors, Mr. Michael Segal, Holocaust survivor, Mala Tribich. Dear guests, I am honored to stand here today in this historic location to commemorate the memory of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. I am also deeply moved to be a part of an official Knesset delegation to the March of the Living, along with my friend, member of the Knesset, Mufid Mar'i. Earlier today, we held official meeting at the Polish Parliament. In our meeting, we spoke with a member of the Parliament about the need to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and to fight anti-Semitism on all its forms in order to ensure that the tragedy will never be repeated. The global rise in anti-Semitism is a cause for concern, and we as lawmakers need to do whatever it's in our power to stand and say, never again. This is our commitment, and we owe it for the victims, for the survivor, and the generations to come. Thank you.
Toda Rabba. Thank you, Yasmin. I would like to welcome Mr. Michael Siegel, Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency. The Jewish Agency is a strategic partner of the International March of the Living, and we are honored to host several delegations from them on this year's march, many of whom are with us here tonight. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you and Anita join us on this year's march.
Well, now,
Thank you, Greg. First, it's quite an honor. I'm sure all of us feel the same way. It's very special to now be back together in Poland for the 34th year of the march. Every year, and particularly this year with the events that are going on, it becomes more important that we commemorate the Holocaust as there are fewer survivors, to pass on their personal stories and educate future generations, and to bear witness to the atrocities that occurred. Today, we have the honor of having 8 survivors present, marching alongside our delegation of over 3,000 participants from 25 countries, including a group of refugees from the Ukraine. The theme of this year's parade is Fighting Anti-Semitism, a mission the Jewish Agency for Israel continues to uphold in our work globally. Thousands of Jewish agency shlichim, our emissaries, and again go amongst to the communities and particularly onto college campuses, working in those communities worldwide, and are at the forefront of fighting against anti-Semitism and the commemoration of the Holocaust through their leadership of educational programs. As a strategic partner of the March of the Living, I'm proud to share that the Jewish Agency brought here today a special delegation made up of victims of anti-Semitism from around the world who will convey a strong message of strength and rise of amongst the rising anti-Semitism. The first ever international delegation of attendees is made up of individuals who were targeted or lost loved ones in anti-Semitic attacks in the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Turkey, India, and Argentina. It's a solemn honor to bear witness to the horrors of the past, together with a group of brave Jewish sisters and brothers from around the world who have personally borne the wrath of today's anti-Semitism. The Jewish Agency stands here in support of International March of the Living's mission to honor the victims of the past, while encouraging the world to remain vigilant on behalf of the victims of the future. I'd like to introduce, and you'll hear more from all of them later, but I'd like to at least introduce the members of the delegation that are the victims of these personal attacks. So first is Howard Feinberg, whose mother, Joyce Feinberg, was killed in the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. Howard, where are you? Thank you. Agi Orpaz, whose mother, Yocheved, was killed in the attack at a Chabad house in Mumbai in 2008. Adi Damari, who lost her mother, Simcha, in a suicide bombing in Turkey in 2016, in which her father was also seriously injured. Miri Ben Zev Koran, whose husband was killed by a car bomb at the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992. Pierre Lasri, whose daughter survived the attack on the Ozar HaTorah school in Toulouse in 2012. That started actually from that attack, the victim of terror fund at the Jewish Agency. Margarita Paley from Germany and Sarah Taib Danan from the United Kingdom, who were targeted for wearing Jewish symbols and protesting Nazi symbols. And Goli Horta, daughter of the Mumbai Chabad terror attack, Norma Schwarzblatt Rabinovich. May each of us promote efforts to pass on the memory of the Holocaust to future generations and to fight anti-Semitism whenever and wherever we encounter it. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the people of the Jewish Agency and Jews around the world. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Michael. As we've just heard, the theme of the 2022 March of the Living is all about fighting anti-Semitism and passing the torch of memory from the Holocaust survivors to the next generation. Please turn your attention to this short video.
Soon, we, the Holocaust survivors, won't be here to tell our story. Even now, our collective voice grows fainter.
Now it is up to us to tell the stories of the victims of the Holocaust. It is up to us to make sure that their stories won't become faded memories.
It is up to us to give the victims a voice. It is up to us to prevent history from being rewritten. It is up to us to fight anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. Go to nevermeansnever.com. Together, we will keep the memory of the victims and survivors of the Holocaust alive.
We are honoured that several Holocaust survivors from the United Kingdom are joining this year's march. We are now privileged to hear from Mala Tribich, whose story is one of incredible strength, sadness, and resilience. Born in Piotrków, Poland, Mala survived horrific conditions in the ghetto and was hidden in Częstochowa. She was later deported to the Ravensbrück concentration camp and liberated by the British Army from Bergen-Belsen in 1945 at the age of 14. Mana was honoured by the Queen of England with an MBE, a member of the most excellent order of the British Empire, for her tireless efforts to promote Holocaust education. Mana, bevakasha.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. And I just have a tiny bit of time to tell you a story of 5.5 years during the war. So as you heard, I come from Piotrków, and I was the middle one of 3 children. And before the war, I had a happy life. When war broke out, ours was the first town to have a ghetto, and that was within 2 months of occupation. And this followed a lot of atrocities and suffering, and I won't go into the details because I really want to concentrate on one small story during the war in my life, which was so tragic. So when the deportations were going to take place, and we were all terrified of what was going to happen, lots of people made arrangements to hide themselves or certainly hide their children. And my parents, together with my uncle, the Kleins, Joseph Klein, made arrangements for me to be taken in by not only Christian family, but a family of German origin. And we were to stay there during the deportations. And this was business arrangements. The man was paid very well, and even better because he was German, so we were going to be safer with him and his family. And it all happened. We went by train, one at a time, a week apart, and my cousin, who was a year younger, I was 11 and she was 10. Incidentally, we were treated okay. I mean, they weren't exactly thrilled to have us, but they tolerated us. They didn't ill-treat us. But my cousin, who was an only child, was so terrified of the Germans, and she was so homesick. Well, we both were. We missed our parents, we were with strangers, and we were in great danger. We were supposed to be relatives from Warsaw, and if there was a knock on the door, sometimes it was okay for us to mix. Other times we were quickly, put into a cupboard under the bed, anywhere out of sight. So we were never sure what we were doing. And my cousin, as I told you, an only child, she was so unhappy and so scared, she couldn't bear it, and she asked to be taken home. She was told that the deportations are still happening and she can't go home yet. And she said that her parents had very good friends in Piotrków who are hiding their valuables. They will take her in. And he said, okay, he took her. And I was languishing there for what seemed like a lifetime. And eventually the time came for me to leave. I'm obviously not going into details because there isn't the time of what happened during that time. So I was due to go back to my parents. Deportations were over.
Bless you.
And arrangements were made to meet my father in a flour mill, which before the war belonged to him. Now he was very lucky to have a job there. And when we arrived, there was my father, but also my uncle, Joseph Klein. And he looked at us and he went white with shock. He said, "Where's my daughter?" And the man said, "I brought her back, I took her to your friends." He did mention the name even. And my uncle said, "But she's not there. Where is she? What have you done with my child?" And I still remember vividly my uncle with his hands behind his back, looking at the ground, pacing there and back, saying, "What have you done with my child?" And that is the end of the story. Nobody knows till this day what happened. Soon after that, my uncle, together with my father and lots of other family members and other people, were arrested. They were imprisoned in the local prison. Some of them were released, my father among them, but my uncle, Joseph Klein, wasn't. And the rest of the people were taken to the Jewish cemetery, lined up against the wall, and they were all shot. So my aunt lost her husband, her child, her husband, and that was her whole family. She never got over it. And we were together during the war. We were deported to the same camps, which was Ravensbrück and Bergen-Belsen, and then the ones before that in Poland. And I often felt that aunt must hate me. Why would I have survived and not her daughter? But in fact, she was always such a loving aunt towards me. I almost couldn't understand why, but we did have a wonderful relationship. She finally settled in Israel, and we used to see one another quite often. She traveled and I traveled there, and we had a good relationship. So I wanted to just tell you one tiny story out of my life during the war, because there obviously isn't time to tell a lot. 5.5 years of war. But to finish, I'll tell you that out of my family, only one other survivor, my brother, Sabin Helfgott, who survived. My father was killed trying to escape from a death march. My mother and sister met their deaths in these terrible, in the forest, the terrible forest killings that I'm sure you all know about. So that was my family's fate during the war. And I know that I have very little time, and I want to adhere to it. But there was just a couple of things that I was specifically asked to talk about. I'm not going to talk about them, I'm just going to mention them. And they are why coming on March of the Living is so important. Why is it important to you? How long have you been coming to Mottel, as we call it? Well, I have been coming for about 10 years, and the main importance of coming, and especially all the young people, mostly young people, is, well, firstly to commemorate. So we always come on the anniversary of the Shoah. And the important thing is to keep the memory going, so that the people who perished are never forgotten. because if they are forgotten, it will be as if they have never existed. And of course we know and we feel it very deeply in the Jewish religion that commemoration and remembrance is really important. So that is one reply, and I've got one other question that I've been asked. That this year's theme is passing the torch of memory from one survivor, from the survivors to the next generation. It's an emotional appeal, and how do I feel about it? Well, we know that we can't live forever, and someone has got to take it over. And I have great confidence in the younger generation to do their very best to keep the memory alive. And thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Marla. You're really a true inspiration. You mentioned that your father was killed in the Death March. Tomorrow is the antithesis of that, called the March of the Living. We will all be marching together with our heads held very high. Please turn your attention to a short film recounting the painful testimonies of victims of modern-day anti-Semitism.
On October 27th, 2018, a lone gunman entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and over a period of about an hour, killed 11 people. Among the 11 victims, I knew 7, of which 3 since a very young age, and one of those 3 was my mother.
I remember experiencing anti-Semitism was when I was in the 8th grade. So I was in the age of 12 or 13. And I was sitting in the class waiting for the class to start, and the teacher is entering, and it's a history class. And she's introducing her speech, was asking in front of the whole people, asking, Margareta, tell us what would have happened to you right now if we would be in the year 1938. And this is how she introduced the class in the 8th grade to the topic of the Holocaust. The only answer I gave by that time was saying I would be dead or not here. Then the next time I remember was when I was 16. I was in a Jewish youth camp, and we had a memorial ceremony in Friedrichstraße for the Kindertransport. And I remember it was a very emotional ceremony, and then there were a homeless person who just passed by saying like Heil Hitler and all these things. But this was like also a trigger for me to understand where I'm living, like me living in Germany as a Jewish person. It was also the first time I understood what it means to be Jewish. And from this moment on, I also started to wear my Star of David. It's kind of sad understanding that we as a people went through this kind of thing, but we are still not, like it's still not over. That anti-Semitism is still there, and we see where it can lead to. We are, Baruch Hashem, are fighting it, but in the end it's not only on our hands.
J'étais président des parents d'élèves en 2012, quand les événements se sont déroulés ici, et j'avais une de mes filles, la dernière de mes 4 enfants, qui était scolarisée ici. À un moment, on le voit prendre son revolver et dégainer, mais comme au cinéma. Je suis venu sur les lieux et j'ai vu l'horreur sous mes yeux. Et quand je suis arrivé, j'ai vu Jonathan, un adulte, quoi, le papa du petit Gabriel, et son fils, là, sur le trottoir. Rien n'est complètement comme avant, mais c'est en nous. On a retrouvé la vie, voilà. Même si plus rien n'est comme avant. Aujourd'hui non plus, 10 ans après, je peux vous affirmer que plus rien n'est comme avant.
זה היה יום קצת משונה, אני הייתי ביפן בחילופי סטודנטים. בתום סוף השבוע חזרתי וקיבלתי אימייל מדודה שלי מארצות הברית, ששאלה אותי אם דיברתי עם אמא שלי. אז התפלאתי כי לא ידעתי על שום דבר, לא ראיתי חדשות, אז לא כל כך שמעתי. בית חב"ד היו סך הכל 8 אנשים בפנים. כמות המשאבים שנכנסו כדי להרוג 6 יהודים, זה לא מוסבר על ידי שום דבר אחר חוץ מזה שהם היו יהודים. אני משתתפת במצעד החיים השנה, יחד עם עוד קורבנות של אנטישמיות, כדי להגיד לעולם וכדי להגיד לאנשים שחושבים שאלימות זו הדרך, הזכות לחיות ולהתקיים איך שאנחנו ומי שאנחנו, כל עוד זה לא פוגע באותה זכות אצל אנשים אחרים, זה צריך להיות ערך עליון.
We continue this evening's program with an important panel discussion on the topic of the battle against anti-Semitism, a call to action. The panel will feature a conversation between modern victims of anti-Semitism along with senior members of law enforcement. The panel will be moderated by Mr. Richard Heidemann. Richard D. Heidemann Esquire is Senior Counsel for the Washington, D.C.-based law firm Heidemann, Noodleman and Kulik, P.C., where he serves as counsel to victims of terrorism, anti-Semitism, and human rights violations. He also serves as honorary president for the B'nai Brit International, is the immediate past president of the American Zionist movement, and was the founding chair of the Washington Lawyers Committee at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. He is also the founder and co-chair of the Israel Forever Foundation and the author of the recently published book, The Bloody Price of Freedom. I invite Richard to the stage and the panelists to join, please.